Aloha guys, this is Dr. Tom Walker coming back again for another fascinating discussion. Today we're going to talk about the cell. The cell is the basic unit of living things. Some organisms only have one cell. Humans are not in that category, of course. Quickly, two favors. Number one, I want you to subscribe to my channel and like it. Number two, I want you to buy my book, The Force is With Us. It's astounding evidence of the existence of psychic phenomena, the paranormal, and other spiritual things. Now, moving right along. Cells are in multicellular creatures like humans. Cells are highly specialized, but they're still the basic unit of living matter. Their specialized structure reflects their function. For example, in these, what they have here, these are red blood cells. And here's a stylized nerve cell. So you can see they look quite different, but they're both single cells. Okay, now this looks really complicated because it is. A typical cell, now this is a typical cell from a human, a mammalian cell, has a complex membrane around it. Sorry guys, housekeeping task. It has a complex membrane. We'll talk about that in a moment. A nucleus, different from an atomic nucleus. This is a cellular nucleus, and this is what controls the functioning of the cell. Has the DNA, the genetic material. There's also a smaller nucleus called the nucleolus, and the nucleus has its own membrane around it. There are a number of little tiny organs in the cell, and they're called organelles, and organelle means tiny organs. Took a while for that to come out. Okay, we'll go over each one of these organelles separately. Okay, very important. Life functions on a chemical level, but it also functions on a cellular level. The cell membrane is extremely important. Why? Because it controls what gets in and out of the cell. And in cases the cell regulates what enters and leaves it, it's semi-permeable. What does that mean? It means that some things can get in there and out and some can't, which is exactly what we want. It's called a phospholipid bilayer because it has phospholipid and with lipid chains. Lipids are fats, by the way. We'll talk about that in our next couple of videos. Notice that some of these structures extend all the way through the membrane, like doorways or portals. So the cell membrane's of great importance, and it's really complicated, much more so than what we see here. But for our purposes, at our level, this is good stuff here. Sometimes there are specialized structures on the outside, and we'll talk about that some here too. So what does a cell membrane do? It encases everything, protects it, but it allows entry and exit. Okay, a moment ago we mentioned the nucleus, the control center of the cell. Controls the workings of the entire cell, is surrounded by a double-layered nuclear membrane. Found inside the nucleus, the nucleoplasm. Now, many years ago, they used to call the gel-like material in cells protoplasm. That goes way back, like 50 years or so. At some point over the years, they started calling it cytoplasm. Cyto means cell. And so the rest of the cell has its own cytoplasm, of course. But inside the nucleus, there's a specialized type of cytoplasm known as nucleoplasm. It acts as a medium, a ground medium. It gives shape and form, but it also is a medium where things can move through it. Nucleolus involved in synthesis of ribosomes. Ribosomes are little factories that produce proteins. We'll talk about those a bit more. Also, the famous genetic material, the DNA, the chromosomes, are contained within the nucleus. The only time they condense in the chromosomes, though, is when the cell's getting ready to reproduce. The rest of the time, they're in thread-like, and it's extremely complicated, but you could say that, guys, of everything in biology. It's in a form of chromatin, or chromatin. It's pronounced both ways. Thread-like structures. In other words, what chromatin is, guys, is unwound DNA. And by being unwound, the genetic information is accessible. That's the whole point. So most of the time it's in that shape. Before cell division or mitosis occurs, it condenses into the chromosomes that you hopefully have heard of. All right, we mentioned this a couple times already. Cytoplasm, gel-like substance found inside the cell but outside the nucleus. Why? Because the nucleus has its own nucleoplasm. Composed of cytosol, gel-like, and then within the cytoplasm are the organelles, little organs. This is an important word, simple word, but it's important. Little organs. Okay, the first one we're going to talk about are the mitochondria. Mitochondria are the energy factories of our cells. They're shaped like a kidney bean. They're smooth on the outside, but they have folds called cristae on the inside. And what this does, guys, is it gives a tremendous amount more surface area where activity and energy production can take place. By putting this wrinkled inside there, that adds a great deal more surface area. It's like if you had a bunch of tables in a room and you only had one line. And in the other room you had a bunch of them. You have a lot more surface area in the room with all the tables. We get all of our mitochondria from our mother. The egg cell at fertilization contains mitochondria. The sperm do not. So all the mitochondria that we have in all of our cells came from our mother. It has its own separate DNA. And on crime shows and things, you'll sometimes see them talk about, well, we have a fix on the mitochondrial DNA, but we couldn't on the other. Okay, so it's the power plant of the cell, produces ATP. Ribosomes, we mentioned those briefly a moment ago, sites of protein synthesis. Proteins are extremely important. They're what make up our body's structure. A lot of cells make them for their own use, but also for export elsewhere. Now, there's like a conveyor belt system in the cell called the endoplasmic reticulum. I'm sure that's a word you use every day in your daily life, right? Yeah, endoplasmic reticulum, network of membranes in the cytosol, abbreviated ER. Some of the ER has ribosomes attached to the outside. That's rough endoplasmic reticulum. Some of them do not have ribosomes, and they're smooth, so what do you think they're called? Yeah, smooth endoplasmic reticulum. And here are and because endoplasmic reticulum is an awkward name, we often use the abbreviation. Golgi apparatus is a structure used to package materials for export out of the cell. If we're thinking of the cell as like a factory, the Golgi apparatus would be the shipping department. Puts finishing touches on proteins after synthesis on rough endoplasmic reticulum, packages proteins in Golgi membrane for export outside of the cell. Let's say they're a cell found in the thyroid gland and they make T3 and T4, the thyroid hormones. Then once they produce the hormones, the Golgi mechanism or apparatus within those cells are what packages that stuff and gets it ready for use outside of those cells, for use in the thyroid gland. Lysosomes break down waste for housekeeping within the cell. When we have manufacturing and other things going on, there's a need for cleanup. Cytoskeleton. Think of this, guys, exactly as like if you went to Walmart, Wally World there and bought a tent, a little pop-up tent with those fiberglass rods. Those rods are comparable to the cytoskeleton. They're microfilaments and microtubules are what they're called. But this helps give a framework and a support. Centrioles, rod-shaped structures that function during cell division, which is called mitosis. Now, we'll be going into this in some detail in a very soon in a future video. So centrioles are active in mitosis, which is cell division, and that's all. Okay, on the outside of the cell membrane, there's some of them have specialized structures, like microvilli, little tiny hairs. These things move in waves and help move stuff across surfaces of membranes and things like that. Also, we have a little bit longer ones. They're called cilia. There are a lot of the cells in our body, guys, that have microvilli and cilia. For example, in the respiratory tract, a lot of the tissues there, a lot of the cells have cilia, and it helps move that mucus along. Why do we have the mucus? Well, it traps bacteria and particulate matter and junk and all kinds of stuff. And then, as long as the cilia function, it keeps it moving and all, and we swallow it, or else we poof and expectorate it. Okay, now, in the biological world, there's a number of different cells that have flagella, but in the human, only the sperm cell does. And it's a whip-like tail that propels the sperm along and moves it. Because the sperm, in order to fertilize an egg, guys, the sperm has to travel a long way. They have to enter into the cervix, go all the way through the uterus and out into the fallopian tube or oviductus where fertilization normally takes place. All right, what gets in and out of the cell? Some of it is passive and it just glides right on through. And some of it is active and requires energy. And in this little drawing here, we see naturally, because of gravity, this ball would roll right down the hill. But to get it up the hill takes a lot of energy, and that's what is shown here, ATP. We'll talk about that some more, but remember, ATP is the energy produced biologically for all living things on Earth. It's the strongest argument for evolutionary theory that there is. Say, look, everything from a E. coli bacterium to an elephant makes energy the same way, or uses the same kind of energy. Sorry, I about messed up there. Transport mechanisms. Now this is transport what? Through the cell membrane. Passive means no energy. Passive means no energy, additional energy is required. Active means it is. Diffusion is where it moves from a higher concentration to a lower. Sometimes it has to be helped a little bit. That's called facilitated diffusion. Osmosis, where water will go through a membrane to make equal concentrations. Now we're going to talk about these separately, so don't panic. Tonicity, filtration. Kidneys do a great deal of filtration, for example. The important thing to remember is that passive mechanisms of transport through the cell membrane do not require additional energy. Active mechanisms do. There are active transport pumps, for example, to pump sodium ions, for example, in and out of nerve cells where they'll work, because that's what the major component of what produces a nerve signal. Moving things in and out of the cell, endo and exocytosis, also requires energy. So they're active mechanisms. All right, let's talk about passive transport. Let's see if I can adjust this just a little bit. Okay. There is a tendency in nature. It's just one of the rules that we go by, and that's not a good word. It's the best I can come up with at the moment, though. Nature tends to try to reach a point of equilibrium, and passive diffusion is an example of that. If we dropped an Alka-Seltzer, I don't really know what this is, but tablet into a glass of water, in a short time, it will eventually dissolve and it will reach a state of equilibrium within that water. Why? Because that's just what nature does. It tries to reach a point of equilibrium. Okay? Equilibrium, point at which concentration is equal, no further diffusion is possible. Okay, so that's just a natural process that takes place. It doesn't require energy for this. It just does it. And it's a good thing, too, because we depend on this sort of thing a lot. Passive diffusion does not require energy. Okay, we have little air sacs in our lungs. We'll talk about that in great detail when we talk about the respiratory system. But they're only a single layer of cells, layer thick, and allows oxygen and carbon dioxide to move in and out of them very easily, which is good. If it required energy, guys, we could not produce enough energy. We couldn't eat enough to produce the energy to make this happen. Why? There's 1 million alveoli in each lung. Now, what's happening here, there's a tendency for oxygen to move out of the alveoli and into the blood vessels that are right next to it. Why? Because this is a high concentration, this is a lower one, and it wants to reach a state of equilibrium. By the same token, after the blood's went through the body and it's full of carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, it'll move out of the blood vessel into the alveoli where we exhale it out. For the same reason, it moves from a high concentration to a low concentration. Okay, guys, we are running out of time, so we're going to stop here and we'll pick up here the next video. Be there or be square. Dr. Thomas signing off.